Hello, welcome back. It's been a little while since I last recorded a video. Life has kind of been busy and in the way, but since it's the end of the year and it's time to make end of the year content and talk about our favorite things as well as our least favorite things, I wanted to come back and at least make a best books video and a worst book video for 2025. Overall, I had a pretty good reading year. I didn't think I had a great reading year, but I think that's just colored by like the 2 month reading slump that I had. I still read 85 books, and it was hard for me to narrow down a top 10. So that's why I just am ridiculous. Honestly, we always judge ourselves a little too harshly, I think, at times. I had a really solid reading year, though. And with that being said, I want to talk about the top 10 books that I think make my best list, as well as an honorable mention, which is the book that wasn't quite 5 stars when I read it, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt inclined to up the rating to a 5 star. The first book we're going to talk about is my honorable mention, and to kind of set the stage for this book, I read a lot of young adult fiction this year because I got a job as a high school librarian. So I've been trying to figure out what books are appropriate and, good choices for readers to pick up. That's just not the same things everyone's read over and over again. And in discovering more books, I discovered this young adult thriller and mystery book, which is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley. I haven't stopped thinking about this book since I first read it, like months ago. In this book, we're following our main character, Donis, and she is part of the Anishinaabe tribe. And in this story, she lives in like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, kind of on the border of Canada. And we're learning a lot about life on like the Native American reservation and how there are ties to like drugs and drug trafficking there as well. After an incident with one of her best friends and how it's connected to drugs, Donis is recruited to figure out the mystery surrounding who is pushing the drugs in the reservation. This story is intense. It takes a little while to set up, but the author does a beautiful job of getting that set up, and then once you're off the ramp, you're off for good. I was totally engaged and engrossed this entire story, and it's almost to the point where I want to read it again to see if I could have picked up on the like final twist at the end. But this is definitely one of the best young adult like books I've read, period, let alone best thrillers I've ever read. But it didn't quite crack my top 10, but this one is phenomenal. You should definitely give it a read. Now we're going to get into the books that cracked my top 10 list. Number 10 is one of the many horror books that I was really surprised and moved by this year. And this is an adult book by Kylie Lee Baker, and it's called Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang. So this book is a pandemic book. And while we're like far enough removed from the pandemic where I can read about it, I still get a lot of the raw, visceral feelings of living during that time period as I read this. We're following our main character, Cora Zhang, and she is a crime scene cleanup person, specifically for like murders and tied to the string of murders that have been happening specifically to East Asian women. So this book deals with a lot of like racism, violence, particularly heightened during the COVID pandemic. And this is taking place in New York City, so like it's even more exacerbated in the United States. But we're following Cora because her sister is actually the victim of a hate crime where she gets pushed in front of a train. And it's not a spoiler, that is like one of the first things that happens in the book, and it's also in the synopsis. So we're following her as it turns from her trying to seek vengeance for her sister and understand who did this, why they did it, and it turns a little supernatural, paranormal, uncomfortable, and it is so fantastic. I love all the themes and explorations of things in this book. Specifically, not enough people are talking about the exploration of religion in this book, which I think is super interesting. This book just has so much to say, and it packs such a gut punch, especially the visceral descriptions that Kylie Lee Baker brings to the page. There were multiple times where I was like, oh my god, that is disgusting in the best way possible. This was definitely a standout, and I highly recommend it. I wouldn't say, if you're new to the horror genre, maybe don't start with this one though. Number 9 on my list is the first fantasy book I'm going to talk about, and this is a new to me author, and this is actually a standalone fantasy. I'm sure a lot of people will also probably have this on their best books of the year. It's Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I loved this book, especially the hype surrounding it. I am a little sad my copy got a little water damaged, but I was able to salvage it enough so it doesn't look too bad. We follow our main character Sayona in this, and she is trying to be the first female high mage. In this society, it's very patriarchal, like it's run by men, and then also a lot of the indigenous folks that called the Quen that live just outside of the main government, the colonizer type government, they are also oppressed in this society. But we're following Sayona as she is on a journey to prove everyone wrong and to prove herself that she can be a high mage. So she studies for this test, she gets admitted to this magical academy that she's like built her dreams around, only to find out that it's just as sexist and awful as the rest of her life. She also gets paired up with a partner while she's at this university, and her partner happens to be the Quen janitor, who actually knows much more than he originally lets on. So it's Sayona and Tomo is the name of the janitor, figuring out like the ethics of this magical system. They're navigating like the history and past and like how violence has come into play. This story is a beautiful, like, I want to say this story is like a beautiful tale of like ignorance turned into knowledge and intention versus action. I thought Sayona was such a complex character, and we really see her development throughout the entire book, which I really appreciate. I also think that Tomo was just such a well-written character, and he just had a lot to say in general. I really love this book, and it was one of the books that I read with my online book club, and we had just such a great discussion with it in general. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. It's actually pretty quick to get through, all things considered, too, but I'm just excited to pick up anything else by Emma Wong. This was a fantastic standalone. Next on the list is a book I don't have a physical copy of, and this is another young adult book that I was pleasantly surprised by its darkness. You'll just notice that I really love dark YA, and I'm so sorry. But number 8 is none other than Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White. This is their new, like, most new young adult novel. They just came out with an adult debut novel this year called You Weren't Meant to Be Human. But Compound Fracture is like the third book in their like young adult collection. Following our main character, which is a trans boy by the name of Miles, and Miles lives in like West Virginia, like Appalachia area. So there's a lot of like history and poverty surrounding this story at the forefront. And then it's also Miles dealing with the repercussions of choices made by ancestors and kind of like classism and divide that carries on throughout their time being there. Miles is bullied pretty badly, and it's his experience of finding out like things that his grandfather had done, and like there's all this mystery surrounding a mine that's in the town as well. This book had some of the most horrific descriptions I've ever read in my entire life. Like, this book is brutal from start to finish, truthfully. You feel for Miles so much as they're going through trying to figure out not only about themselves, but their family members, and trying to navigate this feeling of inadequacy they've always kind of had in their mind, while also trying to stay alive at the same time. I was gripped in the story from start to finish, and like the vivid descriptions is what really kept me going with this. But if you're going to read any of Andrew Joseph White's books, I say this is the one to read. If you're going to choose just one, it has to be this one. Okay, next on the list is a dark academia book leaning into the fantasy genre, and no one will be surprised that this author is on the list if you've watched any of my videos. Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is incredible. It was actually really awesome because we read this book after we read Blood Over Brighthaven, and I had already read this book, but my friends hadn't. So it was really interesting drawing comparisons between the two. But if you didn't know, Babel is a story that is about colonialism, and it's talking about like the British power over other countries and things. So we follow our main character, Robin Swift. He is pulled away from the country that he's grown up in by a male white man in power, and he is taken to this prestigious academy, which is the Tower of Babel, where he is learning how to use the magical system that's there and to read different languages and things. I love the magic system in this book. It's something so simple yet so interconnected with our real world. It was so easy to grasp onto the concepts, which sometimes came off as heavy-handed for messages in this book, but I just loved how this book dealt with its characters. Everybody was a complex character. There were a lot of morally gray decisions, as well as decisions that had me scratching my head on behalf of the characters. But my favorite part of this whole book is intertwining violence with translation. I thought that that was the coolest aspect of the story. Like, the only full page spread I made of a quote all year was from Babel, and it was talking about how things get lost in translation, how any act of translation is actually an act of violence, and things were so intertwined. And it also, the idea of, in order to progress, we must have violence too. And that was another theme that was like in Blood Over Bright Haven. So if you're going to read one, you should definitely read the other. But this book was an astounding 5 stars. My favorite book I read in February. This was incredible and thought-provoking. Number 6 on the list is a another dark YA, and this is by one of my favorite authors. It's How Girls Are Made by Mindy McGinnis. If you don't know who Mindy McGinnis is, do yourself a favor and look her up right now. She has written so many young adult novels with a female narrator who is strong and purposeful and deals with a lot of shit. I met Mindy McGinnis at Barnes and Noble a year back, and it was such an incredible experience. I read her book Heroine, and then after that, like, I wanted to read every single thing she wrote, because that was one of my favorite books that I read in 2022. And this year I finally got around to reading like the rest of her backlog. But this is her newest release. This book released in November, and I read it like a week after it came out in 2 days. I loved it. This book is often pitched as like sex education meets euphoria, and it's like a dark contemporary thriller essentially. So we're following 3 different perspectives. We have I forget the first girl's name, and I should know her name. But then we have girl number 1, Shelby, and Joby. And we follow each of these different girls as they have a different way to contribute to the story. Our first female lead, she is creating like an underground education class centered around sex education and teaching young girls the truth behind it, because their sex education at school is not sufficient enough. And I think this speaks to the larger issue of like public schools and education, and how the internet like is supposed to tell you things, but they're not actually true sometimes, and there's like a discrepancy between what is fact and what is fiction. Our second main character, Shelby, is actually like a famous fighter. Like, she has a bunch of reels and stuff, and she is pretty famous for being a young teen, but she is a survivor of a domestic violence incident, and we're watching the fallout of that, as well as her dealing with like social media backlash and all this kind of stuff. Girl went through it. And then our final POV, which I almost found to be the most interesting one, was Joby, and she's a young girl trying to get people to notice her. She is really influenced by the beauty industry, as well as like what other people perceive her to be, and her naivety kind of comes through with that. The main point that like made me want to read this book is in the synopsis. It says one of these 3 girls ends up dead, and I will tell you, I had no idea who it was gonna be the entire time. But oh my gosh, the last 50 pages of this book, jaw on the floor. It was crazy, so well done, so well developed. I loved how this story explored obsession in a bunch of different ways, like tying it to perfectionism and tying it to like self-reflection, self-image. This book is for the girls, truly. Like, I think everyone could read it, obviously. I'm not trying to say not, but like, the way that Mindy McGinnis captures being an insecure teenage girl in all these different aspects is just crazy and relatable. And I think it is so important that we talk about the harder things in life too. And Mindy McGinnis does not shy away from those topics. I love this book. It's my favorite in her catalog now. I think it's dethroned Heroine finally. But yes, please read her books. Bottom line, she's amazing. Number 5 on the list was a very pleasant surprise. It is the only novella on this list, and this book is actually one of the older ones that I read this year too. So this book is called A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. I was in a pretty bad reading slump in the fall, which is weird because fall is my favorite time. I literally made a video about reading in the fall, and then I proceeded to read nothing, record nothing, but I was still happy. I just wasn't reading, you know? My coworker recommended this book to me, and I went in with a very open mind. I knew it was going to be like a short book, whatever. I went in with low expectations, and I was astounded by the results of this book. This book I still think about every day, and it's one of those where the ending is so cruel to the point where I get existential, and like the whole book is centered around this existential dread, this psychological dread. So we're following our main character, and he is banished to hell. And the hell that he is put in is much different than any hell he's ever been taught about, connected to any religion or whatever you might imagine what the afterlife is going to be. But he is specifically dropped in this form of hell where he is in an endless library with a giant pit in the middle. And his goal, in order to get out of hell and to transcend, is to find the book that has been written about his life from start to finish, like the most accurate book you can find about his life. But the thing is, this library is full of every single book that could have ever been written, which, like, sounds kind of cool, where you're like, oh, I could read so much. Most of the books are gibberish, though. So this guy is slowly losing his mind, and then you start to find out other things about the hell that he's been trapped in that just makes the situation even worse as it goes on. If you've ever seen the show The Amazing Digital Circus, this is something that you 1000% should read. Like, it is so connected to that, like, dread of not knowing where you are, what's happening, like if your emotional state's going to make it through, I just connected so strongly with this book, and I think it is such an interesting thought piece. Like, definitely read it for a book club is my advice to you. But if you need something quick, snappy, that's not like too like gory horror, this is the perfect book for that. I loved this. Number 4, we're talking about R.F. Kuang again, y'all. I finally read The Dragon Republic, second book in the Poppy War series. This series just continues to get better as it goes on. The Poppy War was one of my favorite books I read last year, one of my favorite fantasy books of all time, and book 2 is better. I was so happy because I tried to read this book right after I read The Poppy War the first time, and just something wasn't clicking in my weird little brain, so I didn't fully enjoy it, and I thought I wasn't going to like it. So then months later, I ended up finally picking this up, and once I got going, I couldn't stop. Oh my gosh. Rin is even more unhinged in this book. Like, if you don't know what The Poppy War is about, have you been living under a rock? It is as good as everyone says it is. I will die on that hill. It is one of my favorite fantasy series. It's inspired by, like, the Chinese-Japanese war between each other, as well as it brings in, like, Chinese mythology and shamanism and all those sorts of things. But we follow our main character, Rin, as she goes to this, like, military academy, and it's her making it through it before she gets shipped off to be in the war. This book just expands upon the political intrigue in the book, as well as Neja's backstory, which I really loved. That was one of the best parts of this book. I just think the characters are so brilliant, and like the ideas and themes, and just the brutality of war in general is just executed excellently in this book. R.F. Kuang just knows how to write and craft a story and craft characters that you might not agree with, but you are so compelled by. I loved this, and it's going to be on my goal list for 2025 or 2026. Oh my gosh, we're almost in 2026. Crazy. It's going to be on my goal list for next year to complete the series and just reflect on everything it's done for me. So again, a 5-star read from R.F. Kuang. She's killing it over here. We're in the top 3 now, which is crazy to think about. I had another YA book crack my top 3, and I have yet to get one of the kids at my library to read this book, but I'm hoping I can influence them soon, and the paperback is coming out as well, so I will have my own copy of it eventually. But this book is Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. Oh my gosh, this is one of the most beautifully written books I have read ever. We follow our main character, Andrew, as well as his best friend, Thomas, and they go to this academy together. And so it's got like a little bit of that dark academia, pretentious Dead Poets Society vibe to it, mixed with like botanical horror and every like horror you can imagine walking through a forest, essentially. Our 2 main characters are close because Thomas is an illustrator and Andrew is a writer, and it gets to the point where that Thomas will draw Andrew's creations, and then they end up coming to life, and like all of these creatures are like grim fairy tale inspired, weird, monstrous beings, and they start terrorizing the forests surrounding the school that the boys are going to. And so it's the story of these boys like they love each other. It's so clear that they love each other. It's their story together, as well as them fighting outside forces and internal struggles. And this book does not shy away from the harder to talk about subjects. Like, we're talking about, like, internal grief, we're talking about eating disorders, we're talking about, like, insecurities, anxiety, panic, all these sorts of really hard, like, subjects. And C.G. Drews just has a way of turning them literary, to turn the actual feelings into art. And it's incredible what they can do with a pen. Like, I am so jealous of their ability. And if this is the one YA book you take away from this, please read Don't Let the Forest In. I read this for my in-person horror book club, and every single one of us loved it. It was the best book to talk about because we had so many things to say, so many theories about how it actually ended, if you saw, like, certain twists and turns coming. And it's definitely a book that I want to read again in the near future. Like, this was just so stunning, so gorgeous. I'm gonna read Hazel Thorne in 2026, and I'm so excited because C.G. Drews has another book that's coming out called You Did Nothing Wrong. And I think that is their adult debut, but they also have another YA book coming out next year too, called, like, Scorpion Deep. So I am going to be their biggest fan. I am so unbelievably excited for all that's to come from this author. But this book is beautiful, and it is a debut. You are kidding me. Top two. I am so unbelievably happy to talk about this book as my number 2 favorite book of the year. It was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm going to put it in this hand because I've been using every other book in this hand. I was so nervous because a lot of my most anticipated books this year ended up being flops. But this book was everything I needed and more. And it's even more exciting because I actually went to a book talk for Taylor Jenkins Reid on this book, and I have this copy, which is a signed copy, and it's my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid novel. And I've read, like, everything she's ever written. She's also a favorite author of mine. Atmosphere is a story about space, but it's also a story about love and forgiveness and uncertainty at the same time. We're following our main character, Joan, and she is selected to come into, like, the space program when they start letting women be involved with NASA and rockets and all that kind of stuff. So she's highly intelligent, coming into this world, and she also has a lot of, like, family troubles that she's, like, heavily relied on for while trying to balance this job, while also trying to balance the feelings that she has for a female coworker. And this is in the 80s, so it was not as, kosher for that to happen, really. So she's got all these obstacles, and all she wants to do is to feel like she's part of the stars. And it is a beautifully written story. The way that Taylor Jenkins Reid crafts characters and tells you little details that, like, don't seem like a lot, but they tell you everything about a person, is incredible. I loved the descriptions we had while the characters were stargazing, talking about hopes and dreams for the future, while also realizing and seeing them come into being who they actually are. The ending will have you absolutely gripped. And if this tells you anything, like, I was so focused the entire time while reading it. I read the entire, like, last 100 pages in one sitting. This was just phenomenal. And I, like, just read this month too. But, oh, it was incredible. Like, if you're looking for the next Taylor Jenkins Reid book to read, pick up this one, please. It's so good. I want you to pick up all of these books, obviously, but this one is phenomenal. I am so unbelievably excited to talk about my favorite book of this year, and it remained my favorite book since I read it back in March. That book is I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue. This was everything to me. This book was one of those books where I consumed it in one day on audio, and I immediately bought the hardcover, and I want to read it again. Like, it was that poignant, and I knew after I had finished it, it was immediately going on my favorites shelf of all time. This is the only book that made me cry all year, and it did catch me at a pretty vulnerable time in my life, but this book was the final push that I needed to strive for my own happiness too. We're following our main character by the name of Jolene, and she is a Persian American woman working in this, like, corporate office for, like, a large supermarket chain. And so she's kind of sad with her life. She's got pretty bad depression going on right now, and she doesn't really have connections with her coworkers. Like, her company is very much like, we love our employees, but they don't actually love their employees, you know? Like, she deals with a lot of corporate bullcrap all the time, and her way of coping with that was to write things at the bottom of emails to coworkers and then white it out. It was like a little form of therapy for her. Well, she writes something mean to a coworker and then forgets to white it out, and then she gets reported to HR. Thus, the story begins from there. And so they have a third-party HR member come in to deal with this, and she has to go through remedial HR training, essentially. But somehow things get mixed up where she is actually given admin privileges and receives emails from every single person's inbox. So she is now like getting personal information about all of her colleagues and coworkers. And at first you think she's going to use this to like jump ahead to climb the corporate ladder, but she ends up empathizing and forming really great relationships with all of her coworkers because she better understands them as people instead of the front that they try to put on at work. And I just think that was so important to me because I did not survive in the corporate world. I couldn't. I care about like emotions, people's feelings, and I don't care about titles as much. And that's why the story like resonated with me. There was a decision that the character made towards the end that made me really realize that I needed to hold the mirror up to myself, and I actually quit my corporate job like 2 months after I finished this book and got my life together in other aspects, and that's why I'm a librarian now, you know? So, I'm pursuing my master's in school counseling, which was something I thought about for a while, and then after I read this, it just solidified how unhappy I was, and I needed to find a new sense of purpose in life. And I think this book is a beautiful depiction of renewed sense of purpose, as well as living up to the expectations of others and how terrifying that can be at times. I just have so many good things to say about this book. I'm about to start crying even thinking about it again, but this book might not be like everybody's favorite book, but this meant the world to me. And knowing that Natalie Sue is coming out with another book next year, I'm so unbelievably excited. But I hope this finds you well, my favorite book of 2025. And that's a wrap. These are my babies. I had such a good reading year now that I look back, and I appreciate everything that I made it through. And I read a lot of books that I physically own too that made my top 10, so I was proud of that. I don't know. Reflecting on my goals, I maybe didn't do exactly everything I wanted to do, but nobody does in a year, you know? If you made it through this entire video, I would love to know your favorite book in the comments, or a book that really like changed your perspective this year, maybe one that surprised you. I just want to talk about books, you know? I'm hoping to make some more videos. We'll see what the next year brings, but for now, I'm just on a high with all the books that I did really enjoy. So thank you for being here and spending some time. I hope you have a happy new year.